In this lecture, I'll be discussing medical pluralism drawing from Singer and Baer's text. An overview of the work that we'll be covering over the course of this week and in Singer and Baer, some of the overall considerations when we're considering what medical pluralism is or plurality is. We'll look at the Australian case study on dominative medical system, and particularly this is the work of Hans Baer, one of the co-authors of the book. We'll look at some typologies of plural medical systems. From there, we'll go into a discussion of biocultural approaches to medical systems. We'll consider complementary and alternative medicine in the context of medical plural systems and medical pluralism. We'll look at medical subcultures and state power. And we'll look at hybridization and medical pluralism as a reflection of the work to come in anthropology, considering various medical systems and the lived experiences of individuals, both practitioners and those suffering through illness and being diagnosed with disease. Some overall considerations. Plural medical systems should be considered with power relations. So one group is dominant and closely aligned with the dominant social group overall. And this is a theme that emerges again and again over the course of this chapter as well as the text as a whole. Singer and Baer note that indigenous and tribal societies have idiosyncratic patterns and are loosely organized medical systems overall, whereas state societies, wherein medical pluralism is said to exist, looks at the coexistence of a highly elaborate array of medical traditions at both the conceptual and practical level, and noting the cooperation as well as the conflict between these complementary and alternative medical systems and the dominative system, the biomedical system overall. One of the key questions that critical medical anthropologist asks, and what is reflected in the text, is who has access to these various medical systems, both traditional as well as modern systems. Fabrega in 2001 notes that in Java, biomedicine is looked at as practice in clinics as well as hospitals as entry sites into modernity, where exposures to the hegemony of scientific medicine takes place overall. So I think this is a key consideration in looking at where biomedicine is situated in a literal sense, in a geographic sense, and where science is supposedly takes place and scientific paradigms are exerted in particular practice settings. Fabrega notes that for the Javanese, the biomedicine is a system that is good to healing diseases, again associated with modernity. Traditional medicine, on the other hand, has a wide degree of subsystems. And one of the key overall considerations as well is looking at hybrid forms, these new and emerging forms in terms of medical systems and healing practices overall. Singer and Baer go into a fairly lengthy discussion of the Australian medical system and the dominative medical system in Australia. They define dominative medical system, and again, this is drawing from the work of Hans Baer in particular, that the dominative medical system looks at how biomedicine gained respect through, and how this reflects class, gender, race, ethnic relations with practitioners divided along these lines between so-called legitimate forms and non-legitimate systems of healing and medicine. So they break it down into these different aspects: biomedicine, fully legitimized, professionalized, heterodox medical systems; semi-legitimized, professionalized, heterodox medical systems; limited or marginal heterodox medical systems; religious healing systems; and finally folk and ethnic medical systems. They note that the germ theory of disease downplays the roles of politics, economics, as well as social structural determinants of disease through a narrow focus on biological aspect of the individual body. That is a focus on germs and the idea of individual responsibility for maintaining one's health versus the larger structural determinants that expose individuals to varying degrees to risk associated with disease. Critical medical anthropologists note that government support of complementary and alternative medicine is an integral part of its neoliberal effort to divest itself of as much healthcare expenditure as possible that the public will tolerate overall. And thereby also having this very clear function to reduce the costs of the medical system as a whole to the state. Again, this idea of divestment in these structures of healthcare delivery. Chrisman and Kleinman look at three overlapping sectors in the public healthcare system: the popular sector, the folk sector, and the professional sector. They know that the popular sector is performed by patients themselves through their social networks, communities, as well as families. This is also referred to as a therapeutic management group, and it can comprise up to 90% in some cases, and Kleinman's work on Taiwan in particular highlights this. In contrast, the folk sector looks at healers such as shamans and bone setters who are self-trained to do apprenticeship, practice independently, and operate out of the home in quasi-legal or illegal contexts. Whereas the professional sector is the biomedical and professional heterodox medical practitioners, as well as the bureaucratic structures, hospitals, and clinics which support them. Fabrega's 1997 work on the biocultural approach to medical systems looks at two different tiers within state societies. That is, the official scholarly academic medical system oriented to the care of elites, and the less prestigious physicians and folk healers who treat subordinated members of society. Draws from two earlier studies from the archaeological record: the early state of Sumer and the Sumerians, looking at medical pluralism in early state societies and how that developed, and particularly in the Aztec society, drawing from the work of Shogun in the Florentine Codex, looking at the combined naturalistic and supernaturalistic elements. Singer and Baer point out that the sanctioned use of priests, shamans, and physicians is rather rare in the record overall, as they're often seen in contrast to one another or in competing frames with one another. Fabrega continues looking at biomedicine as a dominant and hegemonic profession, which is characterized by the following: patterns of secularization with the weakened role of institutional religion in public life; scientific knowledge, including biological reductionism and the germ theory of disease, that is the separation of mind and body, and the looking at specific biomedical causes of disease and germ biological causes of disease, rather than, again, the social structural determinants thereof. Hospitals is seen as the center for both research and healing. That is a very clear geographic context within which research and healing takes place. The universalization of categories of sickness, and we talked about this earlier, and Singer and Baer addressed this earlier in their text as well, in terms of the universal coding systems. There's also a discussion here of modern and postmodern societies. Modernity is associated with an increase in use of advanced technology, conventional Western science, the idea of reductionism mentioned above, the idea of progress, rationalism, efficiency, as well as secularization as a whole. Whereas postmodern societies, health is viewed for many in the higher socioeconomic categories as an achieved status through their education, prevention, and lifestyle. So this goes into narratives of personal responsibility, how one copes with the disease, and how one manages disease through their engagements with biomedical practitioners, for example, and how one potentially goes outside of the realms of disease to talk about illness in various personal contexts and seeks assistance in various other medical systems outside of the dominative system. Johansson's work looks at complementary and alternative medicine actor networks in Denmark. This is based on interviews with 40 CAM practitioners, as well as 300 patients in CAM clinics throughout Denmark. Johansson looks specifically at three principal actor networks where patients may prefer one, but often operate between them in what Johansson and Singer and Baer refer to as a mixed therapy regimen in complementary and alternative medicine. So the three principal actor networks are the technocratic model, the social democratic model, the neoliberal network model. And each one of these views the body in a different way. In the technocratic network, there's the plumbing model where the body is viewed as a series of pipes. An example of this is the idea of reflexology, which corresponds to different zones in the body that can be accessed through the feet as well as the hands. The social democratic model looks at achieving internal balance in body organs as the focus, and a balance between the body's immune system and external disease agents. Here, the principles of democracy, consultancy, and uniqueness are important, and the focus here, or the intervention, would be a focus on proper nutrition. In the neoliberal network model, the body is viewed as a computer which is governed by the brain that can be reprogrammed when it begins to fail. So the work of applied kinesiology, for example, Touch for Health, these types of systems to essentially reprogram reboot the body brain connection in order for proper functioning to occur. And again, as Johansson notes, patients will go back and forth between these different models, the technocratic network model, the social democratic model, the neoliberal network model, in order to form a treatment regime for themselves. Critical medical anthropologists and medical pluralism. As noted throughout the text, critical medical anthropologists look at patterns of medical pluralism in state societies that parallel the hierarchical and unequal relations in society as a whole. This is based on class, ethnicity, gender, region, as well as religion. So essentially all of the aspects of social inequality are reproduced in medical systems themselves, and in the context of medical pluralism, how there is contested negotiation for power in these various medical settings. It is plural rather than pluralistic, as biomedicine enjoys dominance over the other medical systems, and this is what we've talked about earlier, and what Singer and Baer addressed earlier in the chapter is in the Australian example of the dominative medical system. Nevertheless, people will navigate their way through a variety of alternatives to negotiate a care strategy that works for best for them in light of social and cultural factors. CAM practices may be partially accepted and may challenge biomedical dominance at the same time. As Singer notes, the alliance between biomedicine folk healers as a new colonialism, as this alliance is built within the context of maintaining hierarchical relationships in society as a whole and between medical systems. That is, there is acceptance as long as each medical system knows its place in terms of the overall control of healthcare delivery at the level of the state. Last work on medical subcultures and state power, looking at 4 different systems: the exclusive system, the tolerant system, the integrated systems, and the third world systems. The exclusive systems are those where a national power structure recognizes and tolerates only one medical subculture, that is biomedicine. Examples of this include the Soviet model, the French model, the American model. Tolerant systems give preeminence to biomedicine with a laissez-faire policy towards alternative medical systems. This is exhibited both in Britain as well as Germany. Integrated systems, on the other hand, look at the establishment of training institutions for other approaches to medical systems, including professional associations, hospitals, as well as the pharmaceutical industry. That is, it's not only biomedicine that has that approach, but it's a complete professionalization of other approaches to healing outside of biomedicine. And this occurs in India with Ayurveda and China with traditional Chinese medicine. In third world systems, these are the poor societies in which biomedicine is primarily urban-based, poorly funded, and for elite or small portion of the middle class overall. And this gets into discussions about health disparity, particularly in Mozambique, where you have one biomedical physician for 50,000 people, whereas you have one traditional healer for 200 people. So here it becomes a matter of access and accessibility to biomedicine and how it's simply out of reach for the majority of the population. The authors conclude this chapter with a discussion of hybridization and medical pluralism. Hybridization can be considered as a part of globalization processes overall, looking at the increased exposure to and mixing of various cultural traditions. This occurs within medical systems where you have a combining to either the form of different forms of medical systems or either to form a new medical system or incorporate elements of medical systems together in treatment of a specific health problem. And Singer and Baer provide a couple of examples. One of these is Ayurvedic acupressure, or what is also known as marma therapy, which is a combination of traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. Both stress the importance of the unimpeded flow of energy throughout the body, and so it's a combined elements of these practices and ideology to form an emerging new syncretic theory and approach overall, this hybrid idea of marma. Again, in this chapter, we've looked at some of the overall considerations in medical pluralism. The chapter starts out with the Australian case study on the dominative medical system. We looked at typologies of plural medical systems, Fabrega's biocultural approach to medical systems, complementary and alternative medicine, particularly in the context of dominative systems, as well as in the context of CAM in Denmark, Johansson's example, medical subcultures and state power, and finally concluded with a discussion of hybridization and medical pluralism.